Hello. I hope you enjoy this rebroadcast of one of our favorite episodes from this past year. We are taking a much needed break for a couple of weeks and will return in the new year with new content. Enjoy.
I'm Ann Dart.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you. On today's episode, we will have a fascinating interview with Bruce Goldfarb.
Bruce Goldfarb is an award-winning writer whose work has appeared in the Baltimore Sun, Washington Post, USA Today, Baltimore Magazine, American Archaeology, American Health, and many other publications. Since 2012, Bruce has served as executive assistant to the chief medical examiner for the state of Maryland. He is the public information officer for the Office of the OCME and is curator of the Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death.
The book we will be discussing is 18 Tiny Deaths, the Untold Story of Frances Glessner Lee and the Invention of Modern Forensics. It's the story of a woman whose ambition and accomplishments far exceed the expectations of her time. 18 Tiny Deaths follows transformation of a young wealthy socialite into the mother of modern forensics. 18 Tiny Deaths transports the reader back in time to tell the story of how one woman who should have never even been allowed into the classrooms she ended up teaching in, changing the face of science forever.
We would like to welcome Bruce Goldfarb to our podcast. He is the author of the fascinating book, 18 Tiny Deaths. Welcome, Bruce.
Hi, thanks for having me.
As you were researching Frances's biography, were you able to get a sense of any particular reason she was drawn to the study of murder, or was she just like many people today fascinated by true crime?
Well, she was fascinated by true crime. She read the books of Sherlock Holmes when she was much younger, and Jack the Ripper was going on when she was a teenager. More than anything, I think that she was motivated by recognizing the need and saw that nobody else was working towards advancing the medical examiner system in the United States, and so she stepped up to do what needed to be done.
Frances also made miniatures of operas and symphonies as gifts for friends and family. Are any of those still around? Or are they displayed anywhere?
They do still exist. Her orchestra, the 90 pieces, I saw it last year at the Glessner House in Chicago. I believe that is back at the Chicago Symphony. I don't know whether it's still on display. It really should be. It's extraordinary. The quartet that she did, the Flanzeli Quartet, is at a museum in Switzerland, I understand. I have not seen that in person. She did a lot of crafts, needle points and cross stitch and all sorts of things, and her family, they've shown me a number of crafts she's done over the years. There's quite a bit of her creative work that's still around.
Her contribution to the study of forensics is not widely known, but it seems that a spotlight is deservedly being shown on her work in recent years. Is there a reason the Nutshell galleries have come out from the shadows?
I think that the Nutshells have always had their sort of fan base. They've been known, understandably. They're pretty well known among miniaturists. She was known within a circle of people, and she was known within some police personnel, but not really beyond that. In terms of knowing about Frances herself as a person, there wasn't much beyond that she was a maker of these strange little little dollhouses. Her story and her contributions to the field had not been known up until now. And that was largely due to her own desire to be in the background and have the attention on what was then called legal medicine, now called forensic medicine, rather than using her as a hook to write about.
We happened to read another publication that I won't mention on the show that kind of portrayed Frances as a bored housewife. But your book clearly shows she was a brilliant woman with a mission. Why do you think that is? Why would you think people would have that conclusion?
Up until now, there's been a great deal written and inspired by Frances Glessner Lee, and there's Corinne Botz's coffee table book with these lovely photos, and the story arc on CSI, the TV show. I know of at least 2 books of poetry, several one-person shows on stage, a couple documentaries. It seems that people view her and her work through their own individual lens, and they see what they want to see in her. And some see her as a feminist figure, or some see her as this or that, and her story had not been told. Till now, people have been acting on incomplete information and just didn't really know her story. So hopefully that will be corrected.
Have you been in contact with anybody in her family?
Yes, I still do. We're friends on Facebook. They email me. We've been in touch with her great-grandnieces and great-grandchildren. There's a bunch of them. I hear from them periodically.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Does Harvard University still have ownership of the dioramas?
The ownership of the dioramas at this point is ambiguous. It's not really clear. I don't really know. They are on permanent loan to the Maryland Medical Legal Foundation for the purposes of teaching, and that's where they are. At this point, Frances Glessner Lee made it clear that she was not going to give them to Harvard. At this point, I'm not really sure who you could point to who owns them free and clear.
One of the issues that was highlighted was the use of coroners in many states that were unqualified or untrained in any type of forensics. A lot of them were just appointed for political reasons. Has that improved any since there is so much more of a spotlight on the difference between coroners and medical examiners?
It has not improved as much as what people, I think, imagine. About half the country is still in the coroner system. Certainly the qualifications and training, there is agencies that do certification and training and so forth. It's really difficult to generalize about death investigation throughout the country because there are literally hundreds and hundreds of different systems, and each one has their own little quirks in terms of what cases they investigate, under what circumstances, and who does it, and what their qualifications are. From the time that she began getting involved in the field, there were only medical examiners in 3 jurisdictions, 3 cities, and that's expanded to somewhere 14, 20, which is still pretty good, but not nearly coast to coast the way it could be and perhaps should be.
First off, I want to tell you, we've had the pleasure of seeing the Nutshell Galleries twice. We were so very impressed with them. We saw them at the Smithsonian, and then we attended a talk.
But it was the restoration of
Was
the
that you?
dioramas.
At MedChi, the medical...
Yes.
That was me.
So then you invited us all.
I took the whole group group to go see the Nutshells.
Yeah, everybody just jumped up and we were there.
So after seeing them, I'm curious, do you find that her work is timeless, or do you think that there are some things that modern forensic would have proven inconcise?
You know, unfortunately, very little has changed in the facts of violent death. Violent death is pretty timeless, and there's a limited number of ways. It's, there's blades and fists and ropes and poisons, and that really hasn't changed. And so in that sense, there's not a 21st century way of killing somebody that I'm aware of. The dioramas, the facts that they contain, the things that can be learned from them, observing for evidence, that is timeless. And these things, the dioramas, the room that you saw them in at the medical examiner's office is actually a classroom. It's not a museum. It's not a gallery. And so they're still valuable teaching tools that are used today for the purpose that they were made for. You can look at them. They may look a little aged, but I think if you put a little laptop in there or a little cell phone, a little television, they can be updated very, very modestly, but they're not that far removed from the way people live today.
There wasn't an answer to each of the scenes, correct? It was more or less like learning how to observe a scene.
That's right. It's irresistible. People want to solve. I think the human mind wants an answer. Who did it? What happened here? But you have to realize that you're working with incomplete information because you don't have crime scene forensics, you don't have an autopsy report, you don't have the ability to ask questions of witnesses. So any sort of hypothesis about what happened is incomplete and it's beside the point anyways. Frances Glessner Lee's whole point was to withhold judgment. Don't jump to conclusions. Keep an open mind and consider all the facts. And so that's just what it is to look at it, observe it, note things that may be meaningful, and then report your observations. Can you observe it and then describe your observations accurately to somebody else? And that's what the exercise is all about.
It has to be very interesting to read some people's interpretations of the scenes.
They do. People have all kinds of ideas. I don't argue with people. I don't correct them. It's all subjective. If you see something in it and develop a hypothesis, I've heard all kinds of crazy things, and I'm not one to judge. It's all right with me.
Do they still have the fancy dinner after the classes?
They do. The homicide seminar is very, very traditional. It's run exactly the way it was when she began it in 1945. They still have a group photo. Everybody gets a diploma that says Harvard Associates in Police Sciences. They still use the dioramas for study, and they go out for a fancy dinner. It's on the second night of the conference. It's early enough so that people can develop these relationships and friendships that will carry over into work. They don't eat off of this gilt edge china that was reserved just for the seminar, but it's a very, very nice meal. It's really one of the best meals I've ever had. When I went through the seminar in 2013, I had dinner with Frances Glessner Lee's grandchildren, her two grandchildren. It was a real honor to be with them.
Wow. Is there one particular diorama you're most impressed with?
They're all amazing. They're all individually remarkable for various ways, but the one that I think encapsulates so much in such a small space is the one called Dark Bathroom, where this young woman is partially in a bathtub with water running on her face, and it's only maybe 7 inches by or 8 inches tall by 9 or 10 inches deep. It's a very small space, but there's so much packed into the worn linoleum. There's mineral deposits on the bathtub, and if you look very closely, the boards beneath the sink have been water stained. She took the trouble to get that damage that remains, and the room overall, it's got this beautiful stained glass window. You get the sense of this was once a really grand place that has fallen on harder times, maybe have been converted to a rooming house. It's past its glory days, sort of run down. It's so evocative. There's so much, and it's a very modest wooden commode. She knew a room like that. She was either in a space like that and spent enough time to pick up on these little clues, the exhaust, the smudge on the wall that's above the heating vents, and there's an awful lot packed into that teeny little space. It's just really extraordinary.
Well, I was amazed to find out that she knit the different stockings and stuff with straight pins. Yeah. I'm a knitter. I just cannot imagine.
That one I speak of, where the woman has her legs dangling out of the bathtub, somebody visited a couple of weeks ago, actually a subject expert in knitting, and she's pretty sure that's crochet, that was crocheted, and it must have been done while it was on her foot. It's very, very fine thread, finer than a sewing thread that was crocheted. The workmanship just on that little booty is extraordinary. Just amazing work.
Well, Frances didn't have a craft store that she could run down to get the supplies that people can get today.
No Michael's or Hobby Lobby.
No. And what's more, these were done during the Second World War, where there's all these material shortages. So, nails and getting the right screws, the metals and materials and these sorts of things, every little thing was a struggle to acquire.
It's just amazing.
They really are incredible. Did you learn about Frances Glessner Lee in school, or did you discover her later in your career?
I first learned about Frances Glessner Lee in 1992, and I wrote about it for a newspaper of the American Medical Association. I was freelance writing. At the time, American Medical News paid very well. I think it was something like $1,200 for stories about doctors with interesting hobbies, if you knew a doctor who had a vineyard or those sorts of things. And I wrote about a gang of motorcycling doctors and health professionals. And I heard about these dioramas that were made for training police officers. It had a medical angle to it. So I just did the one-off article in 1992, and it just sort of stuck with me. I kept returning to the medical examiner's office to see them and arranging visits. I was one of these people showing up and asking to see the dioramas, as people do. Make a long story short, it was 2012 when coming through on a tour with a group of editors at the new Forensic Medical Center that had just been opened up, learned about this opening that that they had for the assistant to the chief and kind of lucked into it. It was not the sort of thing I could have planned if I had intended to. I could not have gotten into this position. It's just been just a stroke of great fortune to be in the position where I was.
I'm just glad that there was a lot of information for her because she did lead such an interesting life.
She had an extraordinary life. Really a shame that her part in the development of the field had really been overlooked until now. She really is the only woman